Hello everybody, my name is Elisabeth Paehtz and I'm a German Grandmaster, and today I'm going to show you one of my recent games I played during the European Women's Championship against Alexandra Kosteniuk. And I chose this game because first of all I have a very long history with Alexandra. We have met first time in 1994 and since then we played over 200 or 300 of games, and for me it was a very uncomfortable pairing, to be honest, because the last 5 games in the past 2 years I actually lost everything, and for this reason it was psychologically not so easy. She went for e4, and usually my choice is c5, and also in this game I decided to play c5, knight f3. And here usually my main option is d6, but I played some games before with knight c6, and also I kind of knew, or I felt, that Alexandra will go for her main move bishop b5. Here in this position, which is by the way called the Rossolini defense, Black has 3 main options. There is g6, which is one of the popular options, then e6 as well. d6 is less popular, but when we compare g6 and e6, the main difference is that with g6, in my opinion, you will have a lot of more forced lines, while e6 is probably, objectively speaking, a little bit less forcing. And also e6 is a favorite move of Boris Gelfand, and I liked his games in the e6 line a lot, and for this reason actually I prepared e6. After e6, white has 2 main options. White can either take or play castle. She didn't go for the capture on c6. She went for castling, which is a little bit more in the style of open Sicilian. And after castling, I went for knight e7. And here, white has 3 main options. White can play with d4, which is in the style of a typical open Sicilian. White could go for rook e1. The main idea of rook e1 is that after a6 you can get the bishop to f1. And a move which is not so often played, however not bad at all, is a move c3. And somehow before the game, the night before, I spoke to my coach, and I told him like that I'm expecting, or I feel that she may go for c3. So they prepared me a very nice line, and it was very good because I didn't have to learn a lot, and actually it all went quite far in the game. So after c3, it's clear that white already threats kind of d4, so black cannot be slow and come up with something like knight g6. Black should be here more forcing. That's why a6 is kind of logical. After a6, the main move is bishop a4. Bishop e2 is possible, but looks very strange because you want the e-file opened up for the rook. And bishop takes c6 is not her style at all, because Alexandra likes some kind of full and dynamic positions. And after bishop takes c6, it gets more of an easy character. That's why I was kind of sure she would go for bishop a4, b5, and bishop c2. And here the very important thing is, even if you're not sure about the opening, it's very important to understand that you always need a good answer against the move d4. So for this reason, bishop b7 makes pretty much sense, because in case of d4 we can take. And now we have knight b4, and the bishop cannot really move because bishop b3 results in bishop takes e4. And that's why it's not surprising that here the main answer is the move rook e1. And now after rook e1, d4 is actually a threat, because the e4 pawn is protected by the rook on e1. So a kind of logical move like knight g6 would be less precise, because after the d4 push and knight b4, then bishop b3 is working, and as I said, e4 is protected. So once again, without even needing to remember the theory, it is clear that we need a move which is against d4. And this is a move rook c8. Now d4 is possible, but not so strong again, because we can take, play knight b4. And in case of bishop b3, there is this very nice capture on c1, where after queen takes c1, knight d3, we get the bishop pair. And this is always good to get the bishop pair in an open position. Plus, when we have less space, it's good to exchange pieces. And for this reason, of course, the push d4 is here again not so great. And that's why Alexandra went for the move a4, which is also the main line in this variation. After a4, again, d4 is not a threat because we have the same motif, so I have time to actually develop my knight to g6 and free my bishop. Now, white has, of course, again, some options. White can take here and play knight a3, but knight a3 immediately, that's what Alexandra chose, is more flexible. After knight a3, the pawn on b5 is attacked, and it's always good to defend in a kind of active style, and the most active style is to push b4. b4, knight c4 is sort of forced, and now, of course, it was important to know one more move in the theory, because, okay, it's also logical. If we do nothing, we play some kind of passive move like bishop e7, we give our opponent time for moves like e5. And from the logical point of view, this knight on c4 is already like for us a little bit annoying, and that's why the move knight a5 here is the best option. And after knight a5, according to modern theory or according to top grandmasters, white should actually take on a5, queen takes a5, and then push d4, where black has even the option to push c4 with the idea of b3. This is actually in the database a game of Abdusatturov with black, and that's why we can be sure that he knows what he's doing. However, after knight a5, Alexandra went knight e3, which was for me not so surprising because, as I said, when you are +5 against your opponent, you want to keep a lot of pieces on the board and be flexible. And this knight on e3 is actually also a little bit worrisome, as sometimes there might be ideas like knight f5 or knight d5 because of the opposition with a rook. After knight e3, I just remembered, because it was all prepared by my coach, that here I should play c4, which is logical. It kind of prevents the d4 push in a good positional style, because if you don't play c4, then after d4, she can always capture with a pawn. But after c4, actually, it would mean that in case of d3 or d4, her pawn structure will be destroyed. But in fact, white doesn't have really much an option, because also the move b3 might be annoying. That's why Alexandra went for d3. I took. And now, I mean, the first, for me, critical moment happened in this game, what to do about this pawn challenge. But when we think logically, if I don't capture now on c3, then she will play bishop d2, and then she can always recapture with a bishop, and then actually the structure for her is a lot better. So I kind of felt that I should take on c3, and actually also the engine proved me right. I should take one time on c3. And now actually, I think it was the first time in the game I was thinking for 20 minutes, because it's not so easy what to do here. Rook takes c3 may be possible, but from the human point of view, you don't want to play such a move, because after rook takes c3, you lose a lot of time and your king is in c-center. That's why I didn't even regard rook takes c3 as a kind of huge option. I was rather concerned, or let's say puzzled, whether I should place my bishop to e7 or I place my bishop to c5. There is a plus and a minus about both options. I liked in general the move bishop e7 more because of the option to get my bishop maybe on this diagonal and tease a little bit the pawn on c3. The drawback of bishop f5, bishop e7 is that knight f5 is working. If I play bishop c5, then knight f5 is not an issue, as we can always take and play knight e7, and she has no compensation or not enough. But as I said, the disadvantage is my bishop will not get on this diagonal, plus also the rook is blocked with the attack on c3. So I decided to calculate a bit. I played bishop e7 and I was not much afraid of knight f5. Of course, this move is possible, but I thought in the worst case I take and play castle. I give back the piece. As after f takes g6, h takes g6, I considered this position to be unclear, and actually also the computer proves me right that this position is quite unclear. So I was not afraid of this option by Alexandra. However, she here actually in this position surprised me. She refused to go for for knight f5, but went for the move h4. And now comes, in my opinion, the most psychological, tricky moment in this game. Because, okay, I thought I lost the last 5 games against her, so if I don't take this pawn, it means actually I signalize my opponent that I'm afraid, which also means that I will give her a big psychological advantage. So I was pretty much concerned for this reason to calculate knight takes h4 and to make it somehow work that I can afford to play this move, because it's clear that this bears some risk. But as I said, for me, the first thing was, or the priority was, to actually capture on h4 if it somehow works, because otherwise I would give my opponent a big psychological advantage. So I calculated knight takes h4, knight takes h4, bishop takes h4, and bishop a3. That's what also happened in the game. Now after bishop a3, the problem is we cannot castle. d6 would be a lovely move unless actually it doesn't work, because we can take on d6, and after queen takes d6 we just lose the queen with bishop b5 check, king e7 and knight f5. And for this reason it's clear that after bishop a3 the only option is bishop e7. So after bishop e7, for her it was a kind of logical to take on e7, because she saw the continuation of knight f5. When I actually, or before I took on h4, I was calculating exactly this position. And here in this position I have basically only 2 options. I have the move queen f8 and I have the move queen c5. By intuition, without even understanding what was wrong about queen f8, I was kind of sure that queen f8 is not an option. Later I checked it, queen f8 actually loses because of bishop b5. This can be checked actually with the engines, but this position is just horrible. So I calculated queen c5 and knight takes g7. And I think up to this moment, when Alexandra played h4, she must have seen this position, and I have seen this position. But what is the most important thing about this position? To evaluate it. And the psychological difficulty behind this evaluation is that when you calculate everything in your mind and you see knight takes g7, in your mind you think, oh, the black king has to move. It means the black king is weak and this should be fine for white. But, and here comes a big but, it's not enough to think like this, because usually when we speak about attack and defense, it's always important to understand how many attackers and how many defenders actually exist in the final position. And when we look at this position in particular, it's clear that she has, objectively speaking, only 1 attacker, while I have, let's say king e7, that's what I played in the game, at least 1, 2, 3 defenders. So from the attacking defending point of view, I was sure that I can't be worse, because actually like she has a lonely fighter here. And which is the other thing which is even more important is that when we swap this kind of attacking defending idea and we look about white's king, then we can say that actually I have 1, objectively 2 and 3 attackers, and the king at the moment has no defender. So I think when Alexandra played h4, she forgot to evaluate the final position after knight takes g7, and probably must have thought the knight is now actually attacking my king and my king has to move, and this is something which has to be good for her. But after king e7, she started thinking for 20 minutes and probably understood that she totally forgot the final evaluation about her choice with h4. Now after king e7, the sad news is that she can't even bring another attacker into the game, because queen g4 would just lose a piece after h5. For example, queen h4 check, and now king f8. In case of queen f6, there's rook h7 and the piece is gone. So for this reason, she is forced to actually get the knight out before it is too late, so knight h5. However, this takes a lot of time. The continuation is easy for me, rook g8, and now she went for rook e3, trying to defend on the 3rd rank. This position, according to the engine, is already a little bit better for black, but it's not yet lost. However, from the practical point of view, I would say almost impossible to defend for white. Rook e3, according to the engine, is not so great. Bishop f1 was a better try, but as I said, it's practically speaking very difficult. She went for rook e3, and that was also what I probably would have played on her side, because I also checked the move rook e3 and it looked kind of sound because it gives some protection to the third rank. So rook g5, the good thing for me, it was quite easy to continue the game. Knight f4 and rook g8. So everything for black actually is more or less going automatic, and queen f3. Here was another critical moment because I had the option to play e5 and then take on g2 and play queen against two rooks. I was sure this is good actually for black, but somehow I didn't like this imbalance. And I thought to myself, actually here in this position I have time, and when you have time during an attacking period, then the best thing is like to bring more attackers into the game. And that's why I decided this knight is not yet playing, and it will be much more annoying for her if I go for knight c6 and knight e5 over being concrete with e5 and rook takes g2. So I went knight c6, the idea is knight e5, she went for queen h3, and now knight e5. Now already it's getting quite annoying for her because, okay, a simple threat is to somehow take on d3, then take on c2, also e4 is loose. That's why she went for bishop c2. And now, okay, I started to attack the rook with knight c4. She doesn't have a big choice because if the rook goes to e2 or to e1, then after queen e5 it's very difficult to protect this guy. So she went for rook f3. I went for knight d2 and rook e3. Of course, I could repeat the moves here, but somehow I thought, you know, even if I lost the last 5 games, a draw is actually not bad. But it was a team composition, first of all, and second of all, I was actually very much in love already with my position. So for me, draw was not an option. So instead of knight c4, I went rook g4, which is quite logical. I'm attacking the knight and forcing the knight to e2. And here again, like black has many options. I decided to go for the move knight takes e4, but also rook takes g2 actually is winning according to the engine. It's a little bit a matter of taste, but for me, knight takes e4 was the easiest. Besides, bishop takes e4 was the first choice, and the difference is like that here instead of a bishop on the diagonal we have a knight on e4, and somehow the computer says that the f2 pawn is much more vulnerable than the g2 pawn, but from the psychological point of view this is not easy of course to judge, and the choice I did I actually liked quite much because it was easy. So I took on e4. Bishop takes c4, bishop takes c4, now g2 is under attack. She has to play knight g3 and bishop c6. Now rook e1. So after rook e1, her idea could be rook e5, and here it was already a moment in the game when we both had little time. So I decided to play quite safe and prophylactical. I went rook f4 in order to prevent rook e5 as the f2 pawn is under attack. And to my surprise, she just took on h7, which actually from the kind of logical point of view, when you have a lost position, from the tactical point of view, it's always good to select as many material as possible because this is your only chance. So I understand her choice of queen takes h7. Even so, I think she missed my next move. And this is also like a rule which is good to keep in mind when you are in the position where you need to defend. There is the active defense, there is a passive defense, and there is an exchange of the attacking pieces. The queen we cannot exchange, so this kind of category we can rule out. But before we actually think about how to protect this rook, we should always look if we have an active option. And here we have a very nice move with queen d5. We threat mate on g2, and she is forced to play knight e4. As f3 fails to rook takes g3, and queen h3 might be very annoying after rook h8, and the queen is a little bit overcharged with the responsibility to protect the g2 pawn. So that's why she had to go knight e4, and now with rook g4 we protect the rook again, and again it's the active option because we are attacking the g2 pawn. So she went g3. And now when you're in time trouble, but you have a winning position, it's always good to win some moves. So I went rook g7, I attacked the queen, it can't be a bad move, queen h6, rook g6, another move I met, which is always nice when you are approaching the 40s moves, and queen h3. Now queen f5. Again, I have a threat of rook takes g3 because the queen actually is loose, so she went for queen g2. And here I have to admit I got a little bit nervous. I wasn't sure what to do. I was thinking even about the move queen f4, which later turned out to be the best move according to the engine. But since I had not much time, I decided to play a move which can't be bad and which still keeps everything as it is. So I went queen a5, getting into the pin. So she went back to queen h3. Of course, I could repeat the moves here, but it was never my intention to actually repeat, as she had time trouble herself. So I went for queen c7 and increased the pressure on g3. After queen c7, she went knight c5. Now, of course, she is getting a little bit annoying in terms of like attacking my pawns, but I can simply go queen b6 without any troubles and knight d3. Here was another critical moment in the game because, okay, she has a threat of knight e5 and we can actually prevent it with d6 or with f6. But when we think logical, after f6 we open our king, after d6 we don't open our king. So for this reason it's quite easy to choose from. So I went d6. She went knight b4, attacking my bishop. My bishop is the strongest piece here because of the diagonal, so bishop b7. And now I think she met the final blunder. I'm not sure it was a blunder or not because the position is anyway very, very difficult. Maybe she should go for knight c2. But in general, as I said, the position is hardly defendable. But she met it somehow easy with me. She played rook b1. Not sure she missed queen takes e3 or not. But when you are like for a long time under pressure, it's quite normal that at some point you do blunders or you lose the control, as it's very difficult on the long run to defend a kind of very difficult position. So I took on e3, f takes e3, rook takes g3, and here I was actually already sure that I will win the game because it was a bit too easy now. King f2, I gave the check on g2, king f1, and here very nice rook h2 threat, and the problem is like she cannot really prevent this check and she has to go with a rook to b3, and on b3 the rook is also not great. And the sad point for her is that after a5 she even had to run into this pin. She could still save her knight with king g2, but after rook e2 she's just losing all the pawns. Knight f2 was played. I took on e3. She went rook b6, and here of course, like when we have a technically winning position, it's always good to not give options to your opponent. So for me it was clear I go with the bishop to e2 and I cut the knight from any chances. Now she went for a check on b7, king f8, and she played rook c7 in order to protect her c3 pawn. I went rook e5. Thought like that maybe now rook c5 could be an idea and I just win this ending. I wasn't sure how to actually continue, but she made it sort of easy for me. She went rook d7. Now I pushed d5 and she went rook a7 to get this pawn, but in return I will get the pawn on c3. So she took on a5, I took on c3, and she gave a check on a8, king g7, and here she went for the move a5. After a5, it's very logical to block this pawn, so the pawn cannot move any further. And the sad part is still that the knight on f2 doesn't really have squares. She tried something like knight h1, but objectively speaking, the position is already lost. I gave the check on a1, king h2, and now I decided just to move with my pawn. So I went d4, rook d8, d3. She had to go knight f2 in order to stop this pawn, but after the capture on a5, so after knight takes d3, bishop takes d3, she decided to resign because, okay, she will not have a chance 2 pawns up in the rook ending. This is fairly easy from the technical point of view. So if I sum up the game, actually for me it was psychologically a very tense game, and especially after the move h4 it was the main battle and focus in the entire game, because she wanted to put me under psychological pressure, and I didn't want to show her that I was afraid. And eventually I calculated in terms of the ideas after h4 a bit better, because I actually realized that the final position after knight takes g7 is preferable for black, and I think she forgot to evaluate the final position, and eventually this, objectively speaking, costed her the point in the end.